Good evening and welcome to the ICAS Spring Symposium Epilogue 2021. I'm Shinja Kim, President and Chair of ICAS. Thank you for joining us at this special event on the topics related to the Korean Peninsula issues and the U.S. national security. And it is my pleasure to introduce today's special guest speaker, Director Sydney Seiler. It's good to see you, Director. Welcome. Sydney Seiler is a member of the Senior National Intelligence Service since 2006, and he's currently a National Intelligence Officer for North Korea. In this role, he oversees the production of coordinated intelligence community strategic analysis on North Korea while serving on DNI's subject matter expert and analytic advisor on North Korea issues in support of the DNI's role as the principal intelligence advisor to the president. SID also leads analytic outreach efforts to leverage expertise and capabilities from outside the U.S. intelligence community to enhance the community's analysis on North Korea issues. Director Seiler assumed the role after having served as the senior defense intelligence expert for North Korea at U.S. Forces Korea, where he was the principal advisor and senior expert on Korean Peninsula issues to the commander and broader defense intelligence enterprise. From 2014 to 2015, Sydney served as a U.S. Special Envoy for the Six-Party Talks, where he coordinated U.S. diplomacy and policy on DPRK. And he led negotiations with North Korea and conducted the day-to-day engagement with the Six Party and other international partners. Before that, Sydney served as the Director for Korea on the National Security Council staff from April 2011 to October 2014, advising the President and senior White House officials on Korea issues while serving as the senior White House representative in negotiations with North Korea. He participated in numerous six-party talks between 2003 and 2005 and played a central role as the IC lead in the Illicit Activities Initiative targeting North Korea and the NI National Intelligence Manager for North Korea, the Central Intelligence Agency Directorate of Analysis, CIA's Directorate of Operations, and CIA's Open Source Center. He also served with the National Security Agency and Defense Attaché Office in Seoul. Sydney is a native level speaker, Korean, received his Master's of Arts degree in Korean Studies from Yonsei University Graduate School of International Studies, and he's a graduate of the Korean language programs of the Defense Language Institute and Yonsei University. And he's the author of the book Kim Il-sung 1941 to 1948, The Creation of a Legend, The Building of a Regime, and he is a recipient of the National Intelligence Superior Service Medal and the ROK Order of National Security Merit, Chunsu Medal. And today, as many of you here would know, Director Seiler spoke before the ICAS audience on the Hill twice in the past, ICAS Winter Symposium 2010 and 2014. And today, we are happy and honored with his return to ICAS platform, bringing his past 10 years of drastically evolved and unparalleled level of knowledge and experience about North Korea. So hope you enjoy the program, and please join me in welcoming Director Seiler. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Sid, thank you for coming. This is your third appearance before us, and we don't observe any ceremony. So all the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Sangju, thanks. Yeah, I remember the very first appearance was during Snowmageddon 2000, and the whole experience of getting stuck in 3 feet of snow, making the way down to do it.
Yes.
But great experience then, and it's a great experience now. What I was hoping to do today, this is such an esteemed gathering of individuals who have worked this issue. It's hard to believe somebody's been doing it for 40 years. Many of you have been doing it even more. But I would like to take a little bit of my time to kind of look at the road we've been on, to kind of reflect what we can learn from the past about, where we are now, and what I call, look at North Korea's policy review, not the U.S. policy, North Korea policy review, but Pyongyang's policy review, and then some future directions that we need to be thinking about and looking at. The road we've been on, again, it goes back, I think, really most markedly. You have to think before the end of the Cold War. I started on this issue in April 1982. I arrived on Peninsula when the rumor on the street, not the first rumor of war that I was to hear over the years, was that Kim Jong-il had promised his father, Kim Il-sung, to unify the peninsula for his 70th birthday. So I spent my first 2 weeks there as, a signator, doing signals intelligence, wondering whether we are going to, have to pack up and leave the peninsula. And of course, April 15th, 1982 came and went. Again, rumors of war and tensions were real. I was also there for the Burma bomb blast of 1983, and I remember the tension created by that horrific event. Was there for the Kimpo shootdown. The Kimpo bombing in '86, the Cal shootdown in 1987. It was a reminder both of the capabilities of the Korean People's Army, as well as the intent of the leadership to use force to pursue either tactical or strategic goals. A dangerous North Korea, but, as was throughout the Cold War history, largely a deterred North Korea. I also happened to be there for one of the most transformational time periods. I missed the Olympics, but I was there from '89 to '93. And, this is when North Korea's world was really turned upside down. The 1988 Olympics was witnessed Moscow, Beijing, others all sending teams, ignoring Pyongyang's pleas not to. And then the post-Olympics Nordpolitik efforts, foreign policy efforts of then President No Tae-yu, as the South Koreans courted the socialist bloc, beginning with Hungary, nations normalized relations with Korea one by one. And of course, the whole socialist bloc Cold War structure would subsequently collapse. And North Korea's world was turned upside down. From that point onward, we really see, three trends, I think. One is the weakening of the Korean People's Army, the difficulty in managing that force, feeding, fueling, training a large mechanized force, the down payment on the nuclear capability, which was a long-range artillery, the ability to secure deterrence by having a large arsenal of weapons able to hold Seoul civilian populace hostage, counter value targets, until indeed 1 to 2 weapons worth of, possibly 1 to 2 weapons worth of plutonium in the early 1990s translates over time into what we have today. It was also this time when I was there for the 1991 to 1992 charm-enabled coercion pattern, I think, began. If you remember 1991, 1992, we had the prime minister level, the premier level talks between North and South Korea, leading to major documents like the agreement on non-aggression, reconciliation, exchange, and cooperation, the North-South denuclearization agreement, high-level meetings, lofty expectations, historic agreements, and eventually Pyongyang's loss of interest. It was a pattern and then a breakout from the process. It was a pattern we would see over and over again. And any one of these periods, who led to the breakdown of the agreed framework, you might have a debate about it. What happened toward the end of the six-party talks process in 2007 to 2008, you could have a debate about it. What happened with the Leap Day agreement, where we seem to have some forward momentum. North Korea breaks out and moves to Byungjin. And then what happened in 2018 with all these, again, the same pattern. Historic meetings, historic documents, raised expectations of a permanent peace only to be broken again. And as you look at it, you just see this repeated pattern that I think really explains North Korea's strategic approach over 3 decades. And while we see shifts in from charm to coercion, from negotiations to periods of missile launches and nuclear tests, the tactics change, the choreography is tweaked, a little bit different under Kim Jong-un than under Kim Jong-il or under Kim Il-sung. But the strategic lines of effort in pursuing the WMD program, locking in the nuclear status through diplomacy, muddling through on the political and economic side, these are pretty consistent over 3 decades. So that brings us to the question of where the road we're on today. And I really do believe that North Korea under Kim Jong-un, one departure point from Kim Jong-il, I think is the value he sees in transparency. Now, it's the North Korean style transparency. And we see things paraded that doesn't mean they work. We see things launched that doesn't necessarily lock in a fully operational capability. But what we do see in terms of intent and capabilities is a deliberate effort towards transparency. So that I think we can say, as some of you have heard me note in the past, that North Korea is a strategically understandable, if tactically surprising or tactically unpredictable at times, actor. We saw this in particular from 2018 to 2021. The New Year's address that kicked off the 2018 year of diplomacy, for lack of a better term, 3 engagements with Moon Jae-in, engagements with President Trump, trips to China with Xi Jinping, eventually meeting Vladimir Putin. In his rollout of his shift to diplomacy in 2018, we also had a hint in there that it was not a strategic shift away from his strategic goals of building a nuclear program, locking in a status. In this New Year's address, importantly, Kim Jong-un noted, it directed the munitions industry to spur on development and mass production of nuclear warheads and ballistic missiles, spurring their deployment. It was the direction that even as we go into talks, we are not going to bet our future on a world in which we engage diplomatically with the outside, normalize our relations, turn away from our nuclear program, and seek an integrated part of the international community, finding peace and prosperity in accordance with international norms. But that North Korea, indeed, going forward, would be North Korea. By the end of 2018, by 2019, already in the New Year's address, in which positive words were said about diplomatic progress in 2018, both with the Republic of Korea and the United States, there were also warnings. There were also warnings evident in the 2019 New Year's address to his munitions industry, the direction, again, to steadily increase capabilities to ensure peace through force, A hint already that that Kim had gone as far as he was likely intending to go in 2018, and was already envisioning a pivot away from diplomacy later through the year. We saw a warning to the Republic of Korea. While applauding the progress made in North-South relations, Kim went on to say that when North and South join hands and rely on the united strength of fellow countrymen, no external sanctions and pressure can hinder our efforts to open a broad avenue to national prosperity. We will never tolerate interference and intervention of outside forces. This began a steady stream that you saw both in authoritative statements by Kim later on throughout the year and lower level propaganda, and indeed in North Korea's behavior towards South Korea. The demand that the ROK halt its cooperation with the United States, leave the nuclear issue off of the inter-Korean agenda, and engage in cooperation with the North, independent of and ignoring sanctions. And to the United States, the proclamation that good progress, Singapore was nice, but if the U.S. continues to seek to unilaterally have us denuclearized through sanctions and pressure, we will feel compelled to find a new way to defend national sovereignty. This was amplified a little in 13 April 2019 policy speech, where the language got a little bit more threatening to the South, where there was a warning of a grave situation being created in which the two Koreas could head either direction, easing tensions or return to the path. And then a warning to the United States: you have until the end of the year to change your calculus, or we will do our own examination and choose an alternative path. So I think what we've seen over the last 2 years, the proclamations, in particular, January 1st, there was no New Year's speech, but there was a readout of the fifth party plenum of the seventh party Congress that took place toward the end of 2019 that led to the rollout of what I like to translate as a head-on breakthrough offensive. And then the second key document being 1 year later, of course, the well-known Eighth Party Congress report, which carried the accomplishments of what happened during the Seventh Party Congress and the goals of the Eighth Party Congress. And I think this is important again, and the reason why I'm kind of walking through this is to kind of understand the logic in North Korea's thinking and their approach, their strategic framework, as we examine some of the tactical things that might happen in the coming weeks or months. So the important points to remember, first of all, is that the fifth party plenum, seventh party Congress, and the eighth party Congress readouts reflect policy reviews, North Korea style. May or may be an interesting debate to ask who was at the table, what was the role of the Politburo, what was the role of Kim Yo-jong, was Kim Yong-chol up, was Choi Sun-hee down, all very important, interesting, but not as important as the fact that at the very least, North Korea wanted to portray a movement away from 2018 diplomacy towards a more aggressive stance, more aggressive and independent stance going forward. The second important point to remember is that the head-on breakthrough offensive preceded COVID. I think this is going to be an important point for all Korea watchers to think about going forward, because isolation and austerity and hardship and arduous struggle were already proclaimed prior to North Korea institutionalizing the COVID restrictions we now know that they have. And so while North Korea, and we may talk about this later, is finding itself under a lot of stress on the economic side, questions about food security, questions about the economy, a lot of the pain or a lot of the restrictions that have led to the pain were already being rolled out, or at least the doctrinal foundation, the ideological justification for protracted isolation and austerity was already being rolled out prior to the COVID outbreak. Third point, the Eighth Party Congress, and this is an important thing too, the Eighth Party Congress preceded the U.S. policy review rollout. Now, Kim is under no obligation to time his announcements on U.S. policy or on any party Congress to a U.S. policy review process. But it was clear that in terms, I don't think there can be really any debate that the scope, the detail, and the content of what was rolled out in that Eighth Party Congress highlights of what had been accomplished on the nuclear and conventional side, aspirations ranging from, MIRVs to hypersonic glide vehicles to, more advanced tactical nuclear weapons. All of this was deliberately rolled out prior to our own U.S. policy review rollout. Now, you could read that one of two ways, right? That all of this now suddenly is on the negotiating table, and Kim wanted to raise the ante prior to sitting down. Or you could argue the other way, Kim has no intention to sit down, and as proof of that, he's showing all the things he's going to do, and as the North Koreans like to say, what they say they're going to do, they do. But the message, in these documents was relatively clear. North Korea really spelled out in the head-on breakthrough offensive, which was in essence a proclamation of Byungjin's failure. The Byungjin policy, the simultaneous pursuit of nuclear development and economic development, always was supposed to be a two-pronged. That's what Byungjin means, right? Simultaneous pursuit. In one pursuit, arguably they succeeded. on the nuclear side, culminating with the Hwasong series ICBM launch of 2017. They proclaimed accomplishments having achieved the Byungjin goal in terms of nuclear development. But it's clear on the economic side, they came nowhere close to delivering on what one, it's not really a social contract in North Korea, but the promise to the North Korean people was, unlike the arduous struggle of my father, Kim Jong-il, I, Kim Jong-un, can deliver both. I can deliver economic development and nuclear weapons. We will have our cake and eat it too. And Hobo was, the head-on breakthrough offensive was essentially a proclamation of maybe a more, what one might say, a practical and calibrated approach that is going to focus on weapons development, accepting an arduous struggle, accepting the fact that North Korea, in their own words, would live for the near future under sanctions, under pressure, and that a pivot to self-reliance was a virtue, and anybody who expected help from the outside or compromised with the outside was a treasonous nation selling defeatist. Again, to borrow their own words. And then the PC readout, the Eighth Party Congress readout from the beginning of this year, again, the message to the US, we can hit you now, come to your senses, accept us as a nuclear weapons state, accept the inevitable, and more is coming. Our program will continue to grow. And then finally, I don't want to drag on too much. I do want to make this open to Q&A, obviously. Hidden, or not really hidden, buried in the Eighth Party Congress readout was a pretty strong message to the ROK that the balance of power on the peninsula, that I think you could argue was flipped on its head toward the end of the 1980s and the early 1990s, that the balance of power on the peninsula had decisively tipped in North Korea's favor. To quote them directly, the message, the Eighth Party Congress readout says, now that our national defense capabilities have achieved a level of preemptively containing the threat of hostile forces outside our territory. In other words, now that the US is deterred, decoupling has been achieved. Any escalation of tension on the Korean Peninsula will result in forces who threaten us having their security unstable. I just, you close your eyes and think it's, March 2010 or November 2010, an event like the Cheonan, I'm thinking, the Yeonpyeong-do shelling, lethal kinetic initiation of hostilities by North Korea, in which any South Korean response has to take into calculation the capabilities that North Korea has shown. And it's not surprising that in 2019 and 2020, there was such an emphasis on these short-range ballistic missiles. And in the Eighth Party Congress readout, you see this mention of these capabilities, tactical nuclear weapons even. I'm not here to speak to the veracity of the claims, but clearly what we have is North Korea seeking to establish an ability to dominate the Korean Peninsula and certainly dominate the North-South relationship. So, where are we heading going forward? A couple of things that I think we should keep our eyes on. I'm going to skip ahead in my presentation to wrap up in it and get to some questions. What we can see from Kim is an intent to build a bigger and better arsenal. The 2018 New Year's speech spoke to that. It was clarified more in terms of intent in 2020, and then certainly in 2021 with the Eighth Party Congress, that the defense industry is going to develop and mass produce nuclear warheads, ballistic missiles, deployment, increasing capabilities to enhance the deterrent. That deterrence would be gained through strength, that expectations of diplomacy going forward, if there was ever any way in which for example, 1994 agreed framework could have led to North Korea abandoning its nuclear aspirations in exchange for a better relationship with the United States. I think the repeated history of our efforts toward that end, agreed framework, six-party talks, New Year's agreement, Singapore/Hanoi, kind of point to some of the challenges that the new administration will face. and the new administration well aware of the challenges, committed to dialogue, but I think clearly the ball is in Pyongyang's court at this point. We expect Kim to increasingly seek to examine how far coercion can work with South Korea. There are limits. There's a red line. Kim usually feels for red lines in the dark. He usually pushes. He's maybe at times surprised by the lack of response. I think in August 2015, Park Geun-hye, in response to the landmine incident, threw off that calculus in a very helpful way in terms of the types of deterrence approaches that need to be taken towards the North. That the North is prepared to accept the cost. This is really the spirit of the head-on breakthrough offensive. They're in it for the long haul. There's no promise to the North Korean people of an unrealistically bright future. They're seeking to improve their economy, no doubt, but certainly not taking the steps necessary to really make progress in that regard, and then continue to expand their options. And as you look at that laundry list, super large multiple launch rocket system, cutting edge nuclear tactical weapons, new tactical rockets, medium-sized submarine modernization. I mean, we've all read the statement, right? We've seen the list. That Kim will, as capable and as ready with some timing, perhaps for diplomatic reasons, but more importantly, to move his programs forward through the R&D to deployment phase. This is what we can expect going forward. So let me close. Four quick points. And one is, of course, all of this comes amid a U.S. ROK alliance that has successfully deterred and defended the Korean Peninsula for 7 decades almost, since 1953. Our two sides, I've spent 40 years in the intelligence community, many of those years working side by side with ROK counterparts. The cooperation on the North is solid. Our shared understanding helps provide the basis for a shared policy approach, and there's no reason to think that'll change. Assume strategic continuity on North Korea's part. At the same time, don't let what I just laid out for you seems to be a bit deterministic. It seems to be fatalistic. It seems to be extremely negative as towards the property, as to the possibilities of dialogue, but in no way is that meant to be the case. We put forth the language that the president used today and others have used in terms of the policy review being a thorough, rigorous, inclusive process. That's one that's fed by a really good understanding of the challenge at hand. If there's one thing we can say about the history of the intelligence efforts on North Korea, and where we've had challenges in the past, differences of opinion, I think we're an understanding of North Korea sufficient to have good policy, and that our inability or successive predecessors' inability to find a solution to this problem has not been because we didn't know where the key was hidden. And then, finally, as we go forward, we ask ourselves the intent question over and over. Does the growth of the North Korean nuclear program in terms of its qualitative and quantitative nature speak to potential uses or actions beyond a mere deterrent? Is North Korea going to use their capabilities more aggressively in terms of coercion? Would they seek, as some theorists such as Brad Roberts and others have written, in terms of achieving long-held strategic goals through the use or the threatened use of nuclear weapons, or at the end of the day, is North Korea going to seek to be responsible and try to just ride out the international community until it agrees that North Korea, the inevitability of the North Korean nuclear status. Those are alternative futures, are highly hypothetical, but it's a reminder of how laser focused we need to remain on in watching North Korea, its future actions, its future developments, and working together within the alliance, within broader relationships, to lead North Korea down the long-awaited path of denuclearization and the true peace and prosperity that Kim otherwise tells his people he seeks to pursue. So I'll kind of wrap it up there and leave room for some questions. I hope I didn't go on too long. I timed myself at about 25 minutes, which is over what Sangju asked for, but thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Sid. That's wonderful. Now, floor will be open. Is Bruce Bechtel out there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, go ahead, Bruce.
Okay. Hi, Sid. Nice to see you. Welcome back to the United States of America. My question is, we know that North Korea has sold both conventional arms and WMD or the platforms that support it to both Iran and Syria in recent times. What can you tell us about illicit arms sales to these two countries that are ongoing? And how much of Hamas's supply of rockets do you estimate they got from North Korea?
Thank you, Bruce.
Bruce has to start with the hard question, right? Well, I mean, let me, obviously state that this is a top priority for the U.S. intelligence community. That it's a major concern because, as you mentioned, in the past, North Korea has been involved in these types of activities. The details of what they're doing, obviously, Bruce, they're a bit too sensitive to talk about in this forum, but rest assured that both in terms of the policy side and the intel side, we watch this closely and take action as appropriate.
Okay, very good. Bruce Bennett?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Sid, great to see you. Quick question. How much do you worry about the North Korean biological weapon threat?
Biological weapons in general are something that it's frightening regardless of North Korea or not. I mean, when we look at North Korea in terms of a range of asymmetric capabilities, whether it be, nuclear, chemical, biological, cyber, if we look at its past behavior in terms of the assassination of Kim Jong-nam in Kuala Lumpur Airport, their hand behind so much cyber activity. It's clear that if there is a moral line that some nation states are willing to cross and those others aren't, that North Korea has demonstrated, that they would have no qualms about employing these capabilities. They also know that, the U.S. Declaratory policy on the use of these capabilities is pretty strong, and if they if they can't figure that out, they've got problems of their own. But Bruce, this is clearly, as you know, it's one of the hardest things to get your arms around and understand. But again, at the risk of sounding almost repetitive with what I told Bruce earlier, is it's something we watch very closely, and CBW often takes the back seat to the more headline grabbing nuclear tests and nuclear warheads question. But as the DNI said in a recent ATA testimony, it's an area that we look on, and an area that we think they're actively engaged in, and we watch very close.
Thank you, Sid. Jasper Brown. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Sid. Thanks a lot for your exposition there. Do you remember, I'm sure you do, our old boss, our former boss, who I don't think's on the list here, Joe DeTrani, but you also, and me too, we all used to love to talk about this provocation cycle, right? The provocation cycle. Now, I'm thinking, since Hanoi, the provocation cycle has been broken. I don't hear y'all. You never mentioned it your whole talk. And it looks to me like Kim is sort of hunkered down. He doesn't seem very provocative right now. He seems like he's worried about where his food's going to come from. Would you agree that the provocation cycle might have been broken?
Thank you, Bill.
Bill, that's a great question. And so you hear me use the C word a lot: coercion and coercive action, and I think it's because it's important both to think clearly about the word provocation, because not everything North Korea does is intended to provoke us. I use a 4D formula. There's a development, demonstration, diplomatic messaging, and domestic messaging. And it's not 25, 25, 25, 25. It's never 100%. Every launch you can imagine is scheduled to consider the diplomatic environment at any given time. It may be a launch that says, I really don't care what people think about it. I'm launching. I'm going to prove to them I don't care about it and that they can't make a big deal out of it. Or it may be, more coercive, provocative in nature. And in addition to thinking hard about the P word, it's to kind of break out of the ideal that it's a perfect cycle. Now, I've plotted, just for my own kind of to remember these major trends, the improvement of inter-Korean relations, progress in the 1991-92-3 period, and then kind of the breakout, and then the progress under the agreed framework, and then a subsequent breakout. And you can see over time how North Korea moves in and out of periods of charm and in and out of periods where it, not necessarily to provoke, but it is sees less value in being charming, as it were. In 2019 and 2020 and 2021, but compared to past periods like 2016 and 2017 was mild, but nevertheless you see this return to missile launches, etc., and this refusal to come to the table and negotiate. I think, I don't know whether this was intended or not, but 2016 and 2017 brought a lot of new people to this issue. And they saw 2016 and 2017 as one level of North Korean behavior, and compared to that, 2018 was heavenly, right? It looked like true peace was breaking out because there wasn't a missile launch every 2 to 3 weeks, but at the end of the day, what did a year's worth of diplomacy get Kim? Not very much. And then he backs out again. All he's done is shown restraint for whatever his reasons may be. Eighth Party Congress laying out of that menu doesn't really paint himself into a corner, but he gets the value of showing that the program will continue without necessarily looking like he's begging for attention. So, we shouldn't be too encouraged by the absence of the more heinous type of activities that we had become accustomed to, or even worse yet, going back to when the era of lethal kinetic provocations, because North Korea's, refusal to kind of negotiate on its nuclear program shows that, this will always be a concern going forward.
Thank you. Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, just to follow up a bit. So I guess I'm seeing, I agree with a lot you say, but it seems like Kim is really in a fog right now. The economy is not just bad, it's terrible. And this trade, you never mentioned the trade issue. It's huge. They're not trading with anybody, basically. That's an enormous hit on his economy, and he's admitting to it. I think he's got a tremendous problem with the economy. Now, there are ways to get out of it, and I expect he'll figure out a way. This provocation idea, it just seems natural that he's not provocating right now because he's under such tremendous pressure. That's what I'm thinking.
Oh, I am here, Sungju.
Okay.
By the way.
All right, go ahead, Sid. Respond to that.
Although I would just say, Bill, it's an excellent point. What if you look at the history of known economic, food, energy scarcities in North Korea, perhaps counterintuitively, when they are hurting the most, they sometimes are the least willing to come to the table because they feel vulnerable. And so there's been no correlation seen analytically in terms of hardships in the domestic situation leading to either restraints in bad behavior or a willingness to come negotiate. I do think, you know, you're on to something in the current stand down, and you know, it may be a wait and see period that we've seen in the past, and now that we have behind us this very successful U.S. ROK summit, the contours and details of the U.S. policy review are now public. That, you know, how North Korea responds will be something we will be obviously watching going forward.
Thank you, Sid. Dennis Halpin, please go ahead.
Yeah. So I had a question. I mean, since President Moon was visiting today, it seems of all the diplomacy you talked about and the changes in the Trump administration from, you know, we will destroy you in 2017 to Hanoi, Singapore, Hanoi, and the DMZ. The person that was really the odd man out was Moon Jae-in, because everyone thought President Trump, this was going to be his legacy, his main foreign policy issue. That even Abe had suggested he be nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And he met in Singapore, it went well. Then Hanoi, there were bumps in the DMZ. But then his last year in office, he totally walked away from it. President Trump was focused on COVID, Black Lives Matter, his reelection. North Korea was not even mentioned in the United States by the administration, hardly at all. And the person who had put all their ducks on, or put all their chips on this, was Moon Jae-in. He was really looking for Trump as a vehicle to bring about this South Korean Peninsula peace initiative that he's been pushing. And now he's meeting with President Biden, and he doesn't really know where Biden is going in a policy review. So where did all this tremendous diplomacy leave the South Korean government in all of this?
Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah, well, first of all, you know, it is a reminder, and historians will see this as such, that even when you have a leader in the Republic of Korea who is so dedicated to bringing peace to the peninsula through reconciliation and engagement, Pyongyang repeatedly misses opportunities. There is a degree to which a sustained good relationship with South Korea is similar to a sustained relationship with the United States are things that Kim Jong-un may fear in terms of their potential impact domestically. And maybe that's one of the reasons why North Korea finds it so hard to say yes to the repeated outreach that we've seen under the President Moon's administration. It continued even to today. And I think it's, you know, a testimony to the strong desire for peace and stability as we seek to bring North Korea back to the denuclearization table. I just urge people, it's good that I'm not on the policy side anymore, because I can, you know, kind of look at this more of as an objective third-party observer than a participant, is that the mistake often made when these questions come up is that people fail to look first at Pyongyang, right? And it's, you know, even the statement of whether the Trump administration began to lose interest in North Korea without commenting on the policy side whatsoever. What I can tell you is, after, as demonstrated in Hanoi and in North Korea's statements afterward, there was no sense in which Pyongyang looked like it was seeking to move the ball forward, right? And, you know, I remember after the April 13th, 2012 Taepodong launch that brought an end to the agreed framework, to the Leyte agreement, our efforts to try to jumpstart U.S. DPRK negotiations, to not let that single ICBM launch, ICBM capabilities demonstrating space launch, undermine our diplomatic efforts, is that instead of taking us up on our willingness to explore ways going forward, they take another 4 years of the Obama administration and greet it with a Taepodong launch in December, a nuclear test, the declaration of Byungjin, the repurposing of the Yongbyon Uranium Enrichment Workshop, which Dr. Hecker had seen, the restart of the 5 megawatt reactor, and really kind of what, in retrospect, looking at the 8th Party Congress readout of the 7th Party Congress accomplishments, was the nuclear. So every goodwill effort by the United States to engage the North, again, President Obama arguably not going to get any better interlocutor who was willing to reach out his hand to those who would unclench their fist, rejected. So, bravo to everybody who's tried to make progress with Pyongyang, and it just kind of, because I'm in that circle in a very small way for the few years that I did it. I think our focus needs to be on Pyongyang, and that will be the same going forward. How the ball is really in Pyongyang's court right now.
Thank you, Sid. Sid Hecker, go ahead.
Thank you. Sid, thank you very much for giving us your insight. Actually, I must say I'm really impressed that a person in your position can give us that sort of a candid look at what was there and where we might be going. So let me sort of pinpoint my questions at two things that have sort of puzzled me. And that is, one is in the September 6th, 2018 letter from Kim to Trump. At that point, Kim tells Trump that he's willing to move towards a complete shutdown of the Nuclear Weapons Institute and to irreversible closure of the materials production facility. And what I'd like to know is, what were the considerations at that time? What is your view as the Nuclear Weapons Institute, put aside for the time being as to whether he was going to go through with all of that? But what was the essence of that offer? How did you folks look at that? And then similarly, I was also curious in Bob Woodward's book, Rage, of where Trump is talking about Hanoi and his discussion with Kim Jong-un and how Kim Jong-un offers up, to close Yongbyon. And Trump says, no, you've got 5 facilities. I'm not talking about shutting down 1, 2, 3, 4 isn't good enough, but 5. So I'm just curious, how much can you say about what were the types of facilities and what did Trump, actually know and what was involved in that decision making? Thank you.
Thank you, Sig.
Well, Sig, I don't know of anybody out in the world who could begin to think about the answer to that question than you, without actually having been in the room, because you and I have had kind of parallel kind of paths since at least Jim Kelly went in October of 2000 and first confronted the North on its highly enriched uranium program. And, the question of what do they have? How confident are we in it? And, was it worth allowing the agreed framework where we had the plutonium? And how many times you said it's the plutonium, stupid, right? If we get the plutonium, that's a big deal. And at a certain point, concerns about other facilities diminish the value but never prevented us from exploring diplomacy. That tried to move the ball forward. I'm thinking in particular, Chris Hill's incredible efforts in 2008 to secure the type of verification necessary to get at HU concerns. The way we crafted the leap day understanding so that we got the commitment to shut down the Yongbyon uranium enrichment workshop, which you saw, and the understanding at that time was if the leap day understanding had succeeded, we would have found ourselves back at Dalyutai. We would have been back in six-party talks. We would have been, exploring, all facilities. So, I thought there was a interesting exchange between David Sanger and the president and the subsequent presser that followed the Hanoi summit. And I think I wouldn't focus, too much on, exact numbers and exact facilities and exact titles, but rather, in many ways, not much has changed since October 2000, where, maybe we'll talk about Yongbyon, but nothing else. And that was, without any of what I just said, based on insider, sensitive knowledge, it's pretty well known that, this is what, kind of closed the remaining Trump administration's time in terms of kind of reluctance of Pyongyang to move significantly off of that. So the good news is, and I can say this in more general terms, remember when there used to be a discussion, but our biggest problem is we have two different understandings of denuclearization. And I tell people this is not a semantic question. Denuclearization, the Korean Peninsula versus denuclearization of North Korea. Everyone is well aware of the broad outlines, and if the North gets serious, I think we can make progress, identifiable, what we used to call authentic and credible in the Obama years. We can make identifiable progress that we can say, this is getting to be the real thing. We haven't answered all the questions. We haven't, closed all the deltas, claimed versus assessed. We haven't eliminated all suspicions about each and every building that could house something nefarious. But at least we know we're on some credible path. And I believe that is, really that openness that the new administration has talked about in terms of moving forward. In a way, it's not a grand bargain. It's not strategic patience, but it seeks progress, that builds upon efforts in the past to do the same that have been, unfortunately, repeatedly frustrating.
Sid, if I could just
Okay, go ahead, Sid.
But just 1 second. What could you give me your sense of what is this Nuclear Weapons Institute that Kim mentioned?
Yeah, I don't want to speak to what was in the letter or what Kim may have been thinking about, but I would think more about what he was conceptually trying to do, which was, we're going to shut down Punggye, or we shut down Punggye, right? And I'm going to shut down. So for now, I'm not making any more, right? And so whether this was an actual name of an institute is, do we assess they have a place where they make nuclear warheads? Well, yeah. Where is it? What's it called? Kind of less important than the fact that they have one. And so whether he called it, the Acme Nuclear Warhead Factory, or, would be less important than what he was probably trying to convey. And, as far as intent, I mean, you've watched negotiations over the year. I sat in many negotiations. You see things that are put on the table and taken off the table, either in terms of either what the North is willing to give or what the North is seeking to get. And they end up being no more than diplomatic tactics to generate interest in something that isn't really real, or that there really isn't any intent to follow through on. And this is kind of, you know, part of the negotiating strategy, their toolbox of actions. And unfortunately, again, the fact that there was no ability to move this ball forward at Hanoi, again, kind of from an analytic perspective, reinforces, you know, our assessment on Kim's potential willingness to put parts of his program on the table, but ultimately not surrender his capabilities.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sid. Grace Kang? Grace? If not, Donald Kirk? Okay,
I
Grace,
needed to
go ahead.
unmute. Sorry about that. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I just have two broad questions. One is, to what extent is there any sense of rebellion in certain areas or among certain small groups of people? Do you have any sense of opposition to the Kim regime within North Korea? And secondly, why can't North Korea be like Pakistan? Could you compare the two situations to explain why we demand denuclearization of North Korea, but we don't of Pakistan, even though they have access to networks of terrorists?
Thank you, Grace.
Well, the situation in North Korea is never really pleasant, right? And so, you know, but the North Koreans I've met over the years are survivors, and they, you know, the system is what it is, and North Koreans seek to work within that system. Analysts don't have a well-established history of predicting when the tipping point's been achieved, and, you know, Arab Spring comes, or when suddenly momentum builds in a way that you never could have imagined before. But what we have is, you know, a few perhaps, I don't know. At first, the declaration of Myungjin, and then the failure to deliver on it. And then even Hanoi, I remember watching, I was an avid fan of KCTV before 5G deployment knocked satellite reception off the airways in Seoul. But I do remember watching the North Korean television, Korea Central Television, portrayal of the Hanoi summit as Kim got in the train and went on his way. These bold, the dear leader going out to secure a new future for the country, meeting with an equal in the United States, and no doubt coming back in a way that would deliver a bright future. And then the propaganda machinery's post-Hanoi efforts to try to reinforce that, hey, our future isn't dependent on sanctions relief. Our future isn't dependent on outsiders. Our future, isn't dependent upon overwhelmingly prosperous materialist successes. It's, self-reliance is a virtue, and we will get through this together. Why can't North Korea be a Pakistan? Well, it's a good question. I think first and foremost is, our security commitments to the Republic of Korea, and the standing danger posed by a nuclear North Korea, and its destabilizing impact in Northeast Asia makes denuclearization a laudable goal for every actor in the region, and certainly even at a certain point for North Korea that's made a strategic decision to take a different path towards a different future. And so, the destabilizing impact, the threat posed to our treaty allies, and of course other allies like Japan, no doubt, are also very threatened by a nuclear North Korea, and the future stability of the region really depends upon threat reduction, deterrence, and the eventual denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Thank you, Sid. Donald Kirk?
Thank you. I hope,
Donald?
can I be
Okay, go
heard?
ahead.
Yeah, thank you
Sure,
very
go.
much. Well, sir, I believe I heard you say the summit was a big success. From what I've seen of what came from the summit, it seemed like a recitation of familiar cliches. I don't see where the big success was. But my specific question, and I haven't seen this reported, was have they come to some agreement whereby South Korea can produce missiles with more than 800 kilometers range? In fact, where they're not fettered by that restraint. And is there some pressure in South Korea to become a nuclear weapons power in its own right? And what effect will this have on attempts at negotiation and dialogue with North Korea?
Thank you, Don.
Well, you had me desperately logging into Yonhap because, I was listening to the presser afterward, and I do believe that President Moon made a reference to revised missile guidelines being revoked. But don't quote me on that. I mean, you can go look at that yourself. There's a reason why ROK missiles are not prohibited by United Nations Security Council resolutions, and North Korea's are. And it's clear that as we seek a negotiated settlement, as we try to open up the path towards tension reduction, that the threat posed by North Korea is growing. In both the conventional missile and asymmetric realms, and that the Republic of Korea is developing capabilities necessary to deal with that threat. It's been the advance of this program over the course of 30 years has it's been an interesting one. And one day I'd like to sit down with SIG and talk about things like, when do you think they really thought they should break out of the agreed framework and go down the highly enriched uranium path? What was it, after disappointment with the United States? Was it before they signed the agreed framework? But what's clear is that the pace at which they pursued it and the transparency that only came later led to a lot of denial, particularly in the 2000s, as we had the great plutonium uranium enrichment debate, and we had the, for Koreans out there, I like to call it the Solma period, right? And Solma means really, is North Korea really thinking about nuclear weapons? Solma, could they really do it if they wanted to? Solma used to mean Pyongyang hageseo. If they had them, would they really target us? Isn't this a US DPRK thing? And the 2019 and 2020 launches of these shorter range missiles has really driven home the fact to the people of the Republic of Korea that this is this is not a threat that can be ignored. I can't speak anything more on the missile limitations other than I believed in passing that either President Moon said they were discussed or they were lifted. So don't quote me on that if you're still talking.
I'm sorry, what would be the implications of this if they did lift those restraints? And what impact would this have on dialogue between the two Koreas? How serious can President Moon be about wanting dialogue if they lift restraints on the distance with which missiles can be fired, and if there were increasing pressure in South Korea for its own nuclear weapons program?
Well, sure. Let me turn that into an analytic question that's focused not on South Korea or the United States, but on North Korea. I think North Korea would love, in its propaganda lines through 2019 and 2020 in particular, there was a constant drumbeat on U.S. ROK military exercises and South Korea's import of advanced weaponry. in particular, like the F-35s, the Global Hawks, and I'm sure at some point, and they've made, you know, accusations of missile developments, although they know they risk some hypocrisy there in the light of their own developments, but they're more inclined just to accuse Iraq of hypocrisy in developing these capabilities while criticizing the North Korean capabilities. You know, I think Kim knows that, you know, the ROK, this is is somebody who always talks about his sovereign right to defense, that, you know, the ROK has a sovereign right as well. You know, it's one of those questions that, you know, if this were the type of thing that might derail a negotiation, the negotiation probably wasn't that serious in the first place.
Thank you, Sid. Edmund Trivedi? Edmund, go ahead. Edmund?
Hello?
Edmund, go ahead.
Thanks, Sungju.
Okay.
Sid, do you mind taking a step back and just walking us through a little bit the key considerations that inform the North Korea policy review? We've been talking a little bit about some of the specifics, but, you know, just, you know, in broad brushstrokes, as you take a step back and, you know, you walked us through the last several decades in the past with North Korea and the direction it's taken. But if you can tell us a little bit about what you think led to the administration's decision to take an incremental approach, and specifically, you know, given you counseled us to be realistic but not to be overly negative, why do you think the administration has shifted away from the strategic patience approach of the Obama years?
I think, you know, as experts in this issue, you know, we need to take this to a level of analysis that's higher than kind of more of your tactical, media-centric reflection, ebb and flow of diplomacy. The September 19th joint statement, as it was published, and I remember being in those September 2005 negotiations at Dalyutai. The logic was essentially denuclearize, return to the NPT, get the critical components to the LWR, and normalize relations. Everything was essentially to the right of good things for North Korea came to the right of CVID. We didn't use CVID at the time. We may have, I can't remember. CVID is another kind of red herring distracting issue. However, beginning with the initial action statement, February 2007, and then in the second phase action, and these were the initial actions and second phase action agreements that enabled the forward progress we saw, leading to North Korea's presenting a declaration, giving us, you know, thousands of pages of reactor operating records, and bringing down the cooling tower, shutting down the 5 megawatt, shutting down the fuel fab, shutting down the reprocessing facility. And those statements also, within that was the establishment of the 5 working groups, if you recall, the Northeast Asia Peace and Security, Northeast Asia Security Mechanism, the U.S. DPRK relations, DPRK Japan relations, economic energy aid, and denuclearization, so that a step-by-step process in which North Korea is compensated along the way for actions taken was definitely in play in the 2007-2008 process. Leap forward to the Leap Day Agreement, and the same logic. You shut down your Yongbyon Uranium Enrichment Workshop. You don't turn on the 5 megawatt reactor. You refrain from satellite launches and long-range missile launches. We'll give you 240,000 metric tons of nutritional assistance. Remains recovery operations will restart, and we can move on to the next step. And, even in the Trump administration, pivoting to like Steve Biegun's 31 January 2019 speech at Stanford, where he laid out kind of, the process, the pieces of denuclearization, and, that you would have a timeline along which you would move, and that there would be, action for action, compensation, et cetera. It's always been about, CVID needs to be our goal, but good things start with a halt, right? And so, I don't know that, the opportunity for North Korea to explore a better relationship with the United States, the opportunity to explore a sustained better relationship with the Republic of Korea, to see what could come with normalization relations with Japan, billions of dollars in reparations, and what could come with energy and economic investment, and they so far have not shown sufficient interest that would demonstrate that they valued any of this better than their nuclear weapons program. And some of the 2000 and the documents I mentioned earlier, and I can't remember which one in particular, but Kim repeated that you can't trade national security for economic benefits and a better living. The threats we face are too grave for that. And going forward, I think the challenge will be, and Lord knows we've all tried this. We've tried to say, hey, we don't have a hostile policy. We want a better relationship. We want, I was rereading in preparation for this today, the agreed framework and all the stuff that was said in there. I mean, even going back to the agreed framework, there were good things that would happen. And so far, North Korea has not shown an effort. But, again, the fact that, to borrow from their own language, again, I'm here to speak as an intelligence analyst, not from the policy side. But the fact that this is calibrated and practical, it's flexible, was based upon outreach to people who sat in that negotiating seat before. Sung Kim, I don't know, the translator for President Moon called him special representative. The president introduced him as special envoy. But in any case, Sung's going to be running this. And Ambassador Kim's got a lot of experience. Both an experienced diplomat writ large, and in dealing with the North Koreans. So again, I know the temptation to focus on what we're doing and what we need to be doing, but really this is about, is North Korea going to get serious? And so we'll see over the coming weeks and months how they respond.
Thank you, Sid. Richard White.
Hi, a two-part question. First, how would you assess the current state of Russian-North Korean relations? We know that Putin and other Russian leaders made a big push to assume a bigger role in the peninsula a couple of years ago, but that seems to have died out. And then do you think there's a possibility for Russia-U.S. cooperation in this area? Since I'm sort of searching for where there might be possible areas, and this one seems about as good as any, which means they're all not that great.
Well, I think, Russia has always, in my experience in negotiations side by side with them at the six-party venue in Moscow and Washington, is, they are committed to, in theory, principles of nonproliferation. And they certainly don't, thrive and benefit strategically from a North Korea with nuclear weapons and unpredictable behavior. And, in public statements, they remain committed to denuclearization. And when you think about, an ideal world that Pyongyang might envision of a day when everybody just accepts them as a nuclear power, I think the continued reluctance of not getting more positive support for their efforts in this regard from Beijing and Moscow continue to be frustrating for them. So I do believe that, the China and Russia have potential leverage, see value in getting North Korea to move back down that path of denuclearization. And in that regard, certainly could be, cooperative.
Thank you, Sid. Stephen Haggard from San Diego.
Hi, Sid. Thanks very much for doing this. It's really been informative.
All right.
Yeah. Good seeing you again.
I have a question which follows on Richard's about where we think Beijing is, the perennial question. And I just had a chance finally to go through the panel of experts reports, and I was really struck by how the sanctions evasion has become absolutely wholesale at this juncture. I mean, we're now in multiples of, the refined petroleum caps and so forth appear to be going straight into North Korean ports. So while I agree with Bill, that the North Korean economy is facing a lot of headwinds, China doesn't seem to be particularly intent of even complying with their existing obligations under UN Security Council resolution. So it still seems to me that that's a kind of crucial question, whether they're going to play ball on this.
Thank you, Steve.
No, that's a great comment, and I think, first of all, China has an obligation to realize that this is not an issue they can ignore. That, I have a degree of understanding of their logic, which says, we lack the ultimate leverage, and the types of pressure that you're seeking to apply on North Korea drive Pyongyang away from the table and are worsening the problem and potentially destabilizing. And stability is our top priority. Denuclearization comes after that. And our old time Obama years talking point coming back was, there's a point at which the growth of the nuclear program will present a potentially explosive destabilizing environment that you have to deal with now before it's too late. And of course, they run the numbers again. What can we do? What pressure can we put on them? What's the downside of cutting off food and fuel? Yada yada, and then suddenly it's status quo is preferred. The only exception to that, of course, was the 2016 and 2017 time period, where you did have, that's where we had the remarkable growth in the meteor sanctions that began to have a more significant impact on North Korea. But, I remember personally the 2014-2015 time period, where if it had not been for the interview and the subsequent executive order that came out after the North Korean hack on Sony Pictures, there was no there was no event that you could peg additional sanctions and additional pressure to. And that over time, and this gets to what Bill said about the lack of provocations, you will have this atrophy of enforcement. And all that said, all I can say in response is, North Korea is not a thriving country by any means. And, I think even with the large scale sanctions evasion that you described, this is a country that's hurting. And it is paying the price for its policy decisions. Every sanction that's on North Korea is a decision of Kim Jong-un's, right? It's not a vote of the Security Council. It's a decision of Kim Jong-un at some point, or his father ordering a missile launch or a nuclear test. And a sanctions-free, otherwise normalizing nuclear North Korea has the potential to be even more dangerous, because we know there'd be more capability, more resources available to fund their program and advance it. So the challenge of sanctions and the limitations are well understood by everybody who looks at this issue. Nobody is delusionally thinking that, okay, we've done items number 1 through 12. If we can just move from 13 to 25, 25 is going to be the magic thing that tips them. There's no delusional thinking in that regard. But there is a realization that there is some value. I mean, there's a lot of value, non-proliferation, sending a signal to other potential aspirants of the capabilities that, that there's a price to be paid, and to inhibit, as much as possible, the growth of the program through the sanctions that are on the books.
Thank you, Sid. Next, Heather, go ahead.
Thank you, Sanju. Hi, Sid. How are you? Thank you for your time. Given the influence and power of Kim Yo-jong, what she seems to have anyway, how do you feel this could contribute to the overall strategic environment? Thank you.
What we see is, we've seen direct involvement, Singapore, Pyeongchang, and we've seen her name affixed to statements and documents. I've not been surprised by anything that had her name on it. It could have easily had Kim Young-cheol's, it could have had Choi Sun-hee's, it could have had Kim Gae-gwan's, or it could have ascribed it posthumously to Kang Suk-ju. So I don't mean to be flippant and dismissive, but I don't know that there, in and of itself, Kim Yo-jong's heightened, profile, or if she would suddenly go off the radar for the next 3, 4, 5, 6 months, has any particular impact that is noteworthy. When we've been, everybody who's negotiated with the North Koreans has had to deal with this, hey, the hardliners back home thing, right? It's hardliners versus moderates. And we project our understanding of other countries' systems to potential equities, like, the Ministry of Atomic Energy loves to run the program, and the generals love to have the weapons, and the foreign ministry just wants diplomacy and it's not really evidence-based assessments, I think, over time, and so I don't know that, analytically speaking, that anything traced to her appearance beginning in 2018 in diplomacy with the South or diplomacy with the United States has had a significant policy impact, the North Korean policy impact. I'd be happy to be corrected on that. But yeah, it's interesting. I've had the unique experience of being both a producer of intelligence and a customer, right? When in my time at the White House, and when I would see the level of information, we analysts love all this stuff. Who's up and who's down? Where's Choi Sun-hee? When's the last time he sold you? Was all these people, and it's interesting, but at the end of the day, its policy importance is much lower than we tend to ascribe. It's something that will drive a news cycle or two, but at the end of the day, I haven't seen anything that would suggest it's got a strategic impact.
Thank you, Sid. Tom McDavid. Tom?
Right here, Sungju. Thank you so much.
Go ahead. Please go ahead.
And good to see you, Sid. What an amazing evening, and great questions as well. In the press conference today with President Biden and President Moon, they didn't mention China. What is your take on how the discussions went at their summit about China? And that's part one. Part two is, what is your sense of the ROK leaning towards the Quad and the Quad's influence on the whole Korean Peninsula issue?
Thank you, Tom.
Right. I do recall one reporter asking today whether Taiwan was brought up
Right.
drawing the comparison to Suga, and I think the language on Korea's unique position was mentioned, and I think we have a close ally in the Republic of Korea, and at the foundation of that is both our security commitment to the ROK from all threats, and then more importantly, our shared values, our shared democratic values, free market, human rights, a whole range of global issues where we share a lot in common, and in ways that would come into contrast or contradiction to China's vision of the future it's trying to, create. And so there is a natural way in which our shared values with the ROK will always have us aligned on what one might call the right side of history. Understanding that there is this unique geopolitical and historical dimension to China ROK relations. And so, I certainly can't speak to the details of today's summit meeting or what was shared on China or go anything beyond, what was publicly said. But, this is an issue that, we have worked on, frankly, since the war, because China's always been there. And, throughout the evolution of the US-PRC relationship, our discussions with Seoul have always been, how we cooperate and how we respect each other's interests, even when they're not completely, absolutely, lockstep combined. I think that applies, to the Quad issue as well, in terms of where the Republic of Korea has expressed a willingness to act in ways where, its interests are advanced, obviously, and where, global standards, global norms, global practices are reinforced.
Thank you, Sid. Is Seungjae Park out there from
Yes.
Seoul? Okay, go ahead, Seungjae. All right.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. It's wonderful, it's always good to hear your opinion. Thank you. And just quick question. Well, first one is related with the ransomware hacking by North Korea. And well, if North Korea hacking, the usual pattern is, exchanging the money from the cryptocurrency exchange market. So without the Chinese helping, almost impossible to North Korea get the money. So what is your opinion and how we can stop North Korea's ransomware hacking?
Thank you, SJ.
Well, as the DNI said in her annual threat assessment, we are concerned about the growing espionage, theft, and attack threat that's posed by North Korea's cyber capabilities. And we know that, Pyongyang continues to develop these capabilities and, in increasingly troubling ways. And, we have been the victim of that, whether it be the Sony Pictures attack, attacks on banks, attacks on institutions, some of the ransomware. And it is you hinted at, cooperation with China, which I'm not going to either confirm or deny in a particular case, but, we work globally with countries. We share intelligence. We as appropriate, to work with the international community against actors like North Korea in the cyber domain. And so, I think every responsible nation sees a value in such cooperation, and in particular on North Korea, since, its capabilities continue to develop. That's about all I can really say on that right now.
Thank you, Sid. If not, Nobuo Tanaka out there.
Yeah, thank you very
Okay.
much for the opportunity.
Okay.
I think, thank you. Kim
Okay,
Jong
go
Un
ahead.
said once that he would never repeat the mistake of Gaddafi of Libya. I had experience of joining the G8 summit in the Berlusconi's L'Aquila, where Gaddafi and Obama got together. Gaddafi said that at the lunch, he said he will, the problem of Africa comes from the colonialism of the West. And all the African leaders joined. Obama said, no, because my cousin in Kenya said that corruption is the issue. And corruption has nothing to do with colonialism. So the discussion moves away from corruption, colonialism to corruption. And the year after, 2010, Gaddafi started anti-corruption campaign. Also, Gaddafi said at the lunch, he called up Kim Jong-il, I think, to stop the nuclear development as he did. But in fact, and Gaddafi never thought United States would invade Libya together with Europeans. So actually this sent a strong message to Kim Jong-un not to keep the weapon. And when I read Obama's book and Robert Gates' book, there was no serious discussion about invasion of Libya to the North Korean implication. So the American, and then President Trump came in and moved away from JCPOA with Iran, who do not have weapon yet, while handshake with Kim Jong-un, who has a weapon. So the American policy coordination with Libya and North Korea or Iran is not well taken. So my consideration is, first thing is US should return to the JCPOA as soon as possible and make some kind of international, let's say, coordination of diplomacy about the nuclear policy. That is my point. Thank you.
Response, Sid?
No, and this goes back to some of what I shared kind of with Sig earlier, which is, you know, and many of you have written on it. Jonathan Pollock's book, No Exit, really kind of sticks to me because you've got to, you know, I think we need to look at timelines and causality and see where we can divorce it from public statements. And for me, you know, the language in the early 90s was all about socialist countries that were unable to withstand the challenges of democracy and capitalism opening up to the outside world. And each of these governments fell to democratic movements because they failed to secure the capabilities to defend themselves. Now, the North Korean nuclear program itself, the regime's desire for nuclear weapons predates the fall of the Cold War structure and goes back into the 80s when, you know, no doubt they're looking at, you know, certainly for them, the most stunning example was China and how China began to be treated seriously on the international stage. And so a thought within Kim Il-sung's mind, certainly inherited by Kim Jong-il, that North Korea will never be respected unless it has nuclear weapons. And then after the Cold War ends and other countries like North Korea are transformed and unification comes to Germany, but not to the Korean Peninsula, the compelling purpose of the nuclear capability is to prevent foreign intervention in time of an internal stability crisis that would bring an end to the regime. By 1990, first, you know, Sig's got the exact dates. I just round up or down, right? First reprocessing run producing weapons usable nuclear material. North Korea has already seen 4 decades of the United States and the Republic of Korea not invading. If there's anything 3 successive Kims can be assured of, is there's no military threat to the North posed by the US-ROK alliance. The only thing we pose is the deterrence to North Korea's efforts to repeat what they tried in June of 1950 to bring a conclusion to the divided peninsula dilemma through the use of force. So Ceausescu and Romania, to me, are really the fear, at least, driving Kim Il Sung and Kim Jong Il. Later, and then you just add on, right? Okay, Jikpoa. Once again, evidence of U.S. fickleness. I don't know. Maybe Kim sees it, but it's just on top of a lot of stuff, which is saying the relationship with the United States. And he stated this in the Kim Jong Il in a 2009 foreign ministry statement on the eve of the inauguration of Barack Obama, which stated, "We've lived without if the United States thinks relations with the DPRK, if the United States thinks the DPRK views relations with the U.S. as more important than nuclear weapons, it is mistaken. We've lived all these years without a relationship with the United States. We cannot live without nuclear weapons." And I think there is a degree of openness and honesty there, which is this perception that, the biggest threat posed to North Korea is the peace and prosperity, democracy, capitalist free market economy, thriving South Korea that is stands as an example of what the people of North Korea could enjoy if different policy decisions were being made, and so the reliance on this capability to avoid that type of change has been one of the main obstacles. Then you throw on top of that Libya. You throw on top of that. There's a long list of examples that they can put forward, but I think it's much more complicated than a decision made, after Gaddafi was, attacked.
Thank you, Sid. Joseph Van? If not,
Yes,
Joseph Van, go ahead.
thank you. The question I had, I was wondering about your thoughts on the implications of a formal peace treaty with North Korea versus the current situation with the armistice, and what changes that could create in the environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
So the logic that's embedded in the 2005 joint statement, and even as reflected in the construct of the working groups, and the idea that as denuclearization moves forward, the whole range of security mechanisms, peace guarantees, etc., could be discussed, but you had to have credible forward progress on denuclearization to even begin to think about credible peace. There is an armistice. I come from Michigan, and I think the Michigan state motto goes along the lines of, if you seek a pleasant peninsula, look around you. Right? And I think about the times I would be in Seoul, and I say, this is a city marked by prosperity and peace and stability. The armistice works. The armistice works, except when North Korea, for tactical diplomatic reasons, desires to raise tensions on the peninsula. Inherent flaws in the armistice, that this is not about a mechanism. Peace mechanism could be the natural good culmination to a process in which North Korea changes directions, moves credibly down the path of denuclearization, seeks confidence-building measures with the Republic of Korea and the United States, and we have a path that's really going down the road to true peace. It was inconceivable, thinking back to the 2006, 2007, 2008 time period, that you could envision any move towards peace without progress on denuclearization. And that's not a real policy. It's not a policy decision as much as, what do you say about Pyongyang's intent as it continues to crank out, increases its nuclear and missile arsenal? I guess it could be a chicken or egg argument, and many have made it one, right? That, well, maybe addressing Pyongyang security concerns by moving forward into peace progress could enable denuclearization. It's an interesting thought. I don't know that 2018 necessarily proves, that 2019 and 2020 were the result of Pyongyang seeing good intentioned actions by the U.S. and the ROK that they reciprocated by not raising tensions.
Thank you, Sid. Sid, this is a great conference and time is up. Thank you very much for everyone. Have a great summer now. Okay. Thank you, Sid.
Thank
We'll
you.
keep in touch.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Take care now.